I think one of the most important parts about the long-term care industry is, we've seen a lot of changes. And back then there was these companies that would cover long-term care, but now we're getting into what we call is, that golden wave, right? That silver wave of retirees that are turning 65 and the people that were insured are now, using those long-term care claims. And, one of the statistics that we bring up is, I think it's like close to two out of three people are going to need long-term care. Right. And it is a huge problem, and it's talked about everywhere. And actually, one of the guys that works with us and always comes to a lot of our ceremonies and stuff is, super cool guy, has been in the industry forever. And his biggest part is really opening up the problem. Okay. And a lot of people don't want to really talk about, the root of the problem. They just want to, kind of skip over it. Right. Because no one wants to really come out and say, hey, look, this is an area that we need to really talk about and we need to cover. Okay. And if you look at the companies nowadays, there's not many companies in the long-term care business anymore. Now, Steve, I want to ask you why. And I know why, but I want you to tell, the audience why there's the long-term care companies aren't in business anymore.
Well, it's funny you asked that, because when I got out of college, got into this business, and, somewhere in the mid 90s, there was a big scare about long-term care. So we had, 3 dozen insurance companies that came up with long-term care insurance plans. Well, over that 25, 30 years, it's narrowed down to single digits now, because a lot of these companies didn't have the claims experience, didn't realize what they were buying, and they end up losing money and shutting the doors. I can think of 4 or 5 companies that I dealt with and sold to clients in my people when I was planning with them years ago. They were no longer in the business because of the claims. They didn't realize what would happen, how many people would get sick. So they had no experience. So now it's a niche that only very few insurance companies will insure. And I think, we've heard this before. When you think about that, if this was a profitable product for an insurance company, everybody would be selling it. But it's not, because of the usage.
Yep.
More and more people are using long-term care insurance. Yep. So it's only the companies that have good records, have been doing it a long time, that have gotten it down to a system and a science where they can make some money and still insure people. We also heard what you're talking about when he came to our meeting, and he mentioned there's several states now that are taxing people in their payroll taxes to cover long-term care if they don't have long-term care, because it's becoming a state issue, because people are spending through their assets and expecting the state to cover them for long-term care needs. So the need's there. But what I've learned over the years I've been doing this is nobody likes to talk about it. They all want to talk about interest rates and making money and the S&P 500. Nobody wants to talk about getting sick and having a nurse come in or going to an assisted living. It's just a bad topic. And so a lot of advisors kind of ignore it because it's kind of a doom and gloom topic. Let's talk about making 10, 12% a year in average returns, and nobody wants to talk about the long-term care. So I think less advisors are talking about it. You mentioned the silver tsunami that's out there, over 11,000 people a day turning 65. So it's this thing sitting out there, the elephant in the room, that nobody wants to talk about. And I think it's an important part of retirement planning, because you can fill your pipeline, but that thing will get drained by a nursing home or assisted living real fast.
Yeah. And I think, the effect on the financials, right? We're seeing it. The statistics show that people are living longer. Well, when people live longer, right, and they're going to need more nursing homes. They're going to need, we're in Florida. The audience probably knows this, but how many nursing homes are being built in Florida? A lot, right? We're seeing it everywhere. So, we know it's a problem, and the country knows it's a problem, right? I think there's certain states that are actually starting to think about demanding a long-term care tax, right? For people to actually pay into a long-term care, because what's happening is that, it's diminishing the assets, right? And if you're in that, if you're in that spectrum where your assets, wherever they are, it can really end up hurting. Now there's solutions to these problems too.
Yep.
We talk about all the time, there's certain lifetime incomes that add long-term care riders on them. There's certain life insurance policies, right? IULs that are able to add some long-term care riders on there as well. but just keep in mind everything that when you get older, I mean, me having a background and being in the actuarial models field, actuaries aren't stupid, right? I mean, they know, right? So they're going to charge. So the older that you get, the more you're going to pay for some of those coverages. And if you don't do it earlier, and if you don't have, something planned out, or you don't have, something that's at least, added in or thought about, it could really catch up to you, Steve.
Well, that's a very good point. I talked to a lady the other day, very good health. I didn't realize she was 89 years old. And she said, "Hey, I'm really interested in my daughter who's 62, and I need to cover her for long-term care." And I said, "Well, she already sick." She goes, "No, but she's unfortunately taking care of her husband who has stage 4 cancer, and I'm 89 years old and she helps me. And I just don't want her not to have anybody to take care of her." So she wants a plan that's going to keep her daughter in the home with nurses and stuff coming to the home to help her if she does get sick. So we're taking care of that. So you can still get individual insurance policies, but like you said, there a lot of what we've seen is this wave of let's include the coverage on the financial products. So
Yeah.
I think what has to happen is there has to be more people talking about it and not hiding. I think, like Jim mentioned, putting your head in the sand, you're going to suffocate. I mean, that's kind of like with long-term care. If you sit there and you ignore it, and then it hits you, man, the financial plan's out of the window because you're pulling assets out so fast to cover the care.
Yeah.
I mean, you're
Yeah.
talking.
Right. And when one moment you're leaving your son and your daughter $500,000 or $500,000, and now 5 years later, all that's gone, right? Because I mean, the average cost of a nursing home in general is what, $7,000 to $8,000 a month
Yeah,
for a nice one.
at least for a good one.
I,
Yeah,
I mean, that's where it kind of gets crazy, because people always say, it's not about really what you save, it's about what you spend too. And we talk about that on past
yeah.
episodes.